Let's take a deep breath and understand what's happening here. A blackout in Moscow, the heart of Russia's power, its lifeline, isn't just a news headline. It's a signal, a warning, and perhaps a turning point. When Ukraine's strikes reportedly cut Moscow's main energy lifeline, it didn't just plunge a city into darkness, it illuminated something far more critical: the unraveling of a global system that depends on fragile power structures, both literal and political. This isn't just a regional conflict anymore. This is a mirror reflecting the instability of an empire that has spent decades believing it was immune to collapse. Moscow's sudden plunge into darkness was more than just a technical malfunction. It was a geopolitical earthquake that sent shockwaves through the corridors of global power. The moment the lights went out, the illusion of control flickered with them. Ukraine's strikes, if indeed they were the cause, did not merely damage an electrical grid, they disrupted the very sense of invincibility that Russia's capital has projected for decades. For a city that stands as a symbol of authority, strength, and continuity, a blackout is not just about power loss, it's about psychological exposure. The world's attention snapped to this moment, not because of the absence of light, but because of what it revealed in that darkness, vulnerability. The truth is, modern warfare has evolved into something far more strategic and cerebral. A well-placed strike on a transformer, a disruption in an energy corridor, these actions carry the same impact today as tanks once did on the battlefield. Moscow's blackout exposed how dependent even the most fortified nations are on their technological arteries. When those arteries are severed, the lifeblood of power, both literal and political, begins to drain. The blackout didn't just halt electricity, it halted routine, confidence, and the rhythm of a nation's capital. That kind of disruption sends an unmistakable message not only to Russia, but to the world. Power is no longer about who has the most weapons, but about who can disrupt the flow that sustains them. The timing of this incident couldn't have been more symbolic. As global attention intensifies on the ongoing conflict, this blackout reminded everyone that Russia's command center is not untouchable. The world's major cities, from Washington to Beijing, took notice, quietly wondering how resilient their own infrastructures might be under similar pressure. That's the real hook. In the age of interconnected grids, nobody is immune. One city's blackout can serve as a rehearsal for another's collapse. The symbolism is undeniable. A capital built on centuries of power, now forced to confront a night without light. And in that night, something shifted. The blackout didn't just mark a technical failure, it signaled a strategic awakening. It showed that even in the heart of power, fear can spread faster than light returns. It proved that in modern conflict, darkness is no longer a setback, it's a weapon. Ukraine's latest move carried a message louder than any speech, clearer than any press statement: we can reach you. That message echoed across the skyline of Moscow as its lights went dark, cutting through years of Russian confidence and carefully crafted dominance. This wasn't just a tactical strike, it was psychological warfare at its most precise. For a nation like Russia, which has long prided itself on strength, control, and strategic reach, the idea that its own capital could be shaken so deeply is a seismic moment. It pierced the illusion of safety that power often creates, reminding the world that no fortress is impenetrable, no leader untouchable, and no city immune from the consequences of war. The symbolism here is profound. By striking Moscow's main energy lifeline, Ukraine effectively reached into the heart of its adversary and turned off the lights, not just literally, but metaphorically. It was a statement of capability and defiance, crafted not only to disrupt infrastructure, but to disrupt confidence. The Kremlin, accustomed to projecting its strength outward, suddenly found itself defending the perception of stability within. This is where the true power of modern warfare lies, not merely in destruction, but in shaping the narrative, in turning an enemy's certainty into hesitation. The world watched as reports emerged of halted trains, flickering buildings, and emergency power systems kicking in across the Russian capital. But beyond the technical chaos, what truly struck observers was the psychological effect. The blackout transformed Moscow from a symbol of power into a scene of vulnerability, if only for a moment. And that moment mattered. It revealed how fear, uncertainty, and doubt can travel faster than missiles. Ukraine didn't just hit a target, it hit a nerve. That's the hook. The understanding that modern conflicts are as much about perception as they are about precision. For Ukraine, the strike served multiple purposes. Militarily, it demonstrated growing reach and sophistication. Politically, it reminded global allies of Ukraine's resilience and strategic ingenuity. And psychologically, it fractured the aura of Russian invulnerability that has loomed over the region for generations. Each blackout in Moscow isn't just a power failure. It's a statement written in darkness. It says, "We are not powerless. We can strike where you least expect it." And in the world of power politics, that message can sometimes be more potent than the strike itself. Russia's economy has always been fueled, quite literally, by energy. Oil, gas, and electricity have long served as both the lifeblood of its domestic strength and the backbone of its global influence. But when Moscow's main energy lifeline was struck and the city went dark, the world witnessed a moment that went beyond military conflict. It was an economic warning flare. The blackout revealed something deeper, something the Kremlin has long tried to conceal, a system under growing strain. Every flickering light in Moscow became a symbol of a nation whose economic foundation is beginning to crack under the weight of war, sanctions, and dwindling global leverage. The irony is striking. A country once seen as an energy superpower is now struggling to keep its own capital. Illuminated energy dominance has always been Russia's greatest weapon and its greatest weakness. For decades, the Kremlin used its vast natural resources not only to power its own industries, but to control others. Europe's dependency on Russian gas was a cornerstone of Moscow's geopolitical strategy. Yet today, with supply routes disrupted, exports cut, and global markets realigning, that very weapon has started to backfire. The blackout is more than a local failure. It's an indicator that the core machinery of Russia's economic system is faltering. And when energy fails, everything tied to it, finance, production, communication, and public morale, begins to follow. That's the hook here. Power, both electrical and political, is only as strong as the network that sustains. Inside Russia, this growing pressure is palpable. The government's massive war expenditures have drained funds once reserved for domestic stability. Industries that relied on imported technology are struggling under sanctions. Even as officials promise quick recovery, the deeper reality is one of economic suffocation. An empire running on borrowed time and diminishing resources. The blackout, in that sense, became a symbol of depletion, a visible consequence of years of overextension. Beyond Russia's borders, the ripple effects are just as significant. Investors see instability where once there was confidence. Energy markets react nervously to every new disruption. And nations that once feared Russian dominance are beginning to recognize that the empire's greatest source of power can also be its downfall. The night Moscow went dark, it wasn't just a city that lost electricity, it was a global signal that even the strongest economies can be brought to their knees when their foundation begins to fail from within. The blackout in Moscow didn't just mark a power failure, it announced the arrival of a new kind of warfare, one where the battlefield is not defined by territory, but by technology. We have officially entered an era where the front lines are invisible, where victory is measured not by captured land, but by the ability to cripple a nation's infrastructure without ever crossing its borders. Ukraine's precision strikes, if confirmed, represent this transformation in full force. They show how modern conflicts are now waged through data cables, energy grids, and communication networks, the unseen veins that keep nations alive. The hook here is undeniable. In this new age, control over electrons can be as powerful as control over soldiers. For much of history, wars were fought with armies that marched, tanks that rolled, and planes that roared overhead. Today, the hum of a server room or the flicker of a power grid can decide the fate of millions. The strike that left Moscow dark demonstrated how a single, well-executed attack on infrastructure can destabilize not only a capital, but an entire economy. It's warfare that targets the rhythm of daily life, halting transportation, silencing communication, and sowing chaos without a single ground invasion. The impact is psychological as much as it is physical. Citizens wake to find their cities paralyzed. Governments scramble to restore order, and the line between military target and civilian life vanishes in an instant. This evolution in warfare blurs moral and strategic boundaries. When a country's energy grid becomes a weapon, every light switch, every screen, every heartbeat of modern life becomes part of the conflict. What's striking is that this form of warfare doesn't require massive armies or nuclear arsenals. It requires intelligence, technology, and precision. Ukraine's approach, deliberate and calculated, reflects a shift in power dynamics, smaller nations leveraging modern tools to challenge traditional giants. It's a paradigm shift that leaves even superpowers exposed. And here lies the unsettling truth. No nation is prepared for the full consequences of infrastructure warfare. Every country, from the United States to China, relies on systems just as vulnerable as Moscow's. The blackout was not just Russia's crisis, it was a global preview. It showed us that the wars of the future will not always be fought in trenches, but in circuits, signals, and grids. And when the lights go out, power itself changes hands. When Moscow's lights went out, the darkness didn't stop at Russia's borders. It rippled outward, touching financial markets, energy corridors, and security discussions around the world. The moment Ukraine's strikes disrupted Moscow's main energy lifeline, investors, analysts, and policymakers across continents felt the tremor. Global energy markets, already under pressure from ongoing conflicts and volatile trade routes, reacted instantly. Prices shifted, supply forecasts were redrawn, and questions began to surface. If Russia's capital could be brought to its knees by an attack on its grid, how stable are the systems the rest of the world depends on? That is the real hook, the realization that one nation's blackout can expose the vulnerabilities of a globalized energy network that binds us all. Every major power relies on an interconnected web of energy supply chains and digital infrastructure. When one link falters, the consequences travel far beyond national boundaries. The Moscow blackout reminded global leaders that in the 21st century, the concept of domestic security is almost obsolete. What affects one economic giant inevitably affects the rest. European nations, long dependent on Russian gas, began reassessing emergency reserves. Oil markets in the Middle East monitored the situation closely, aware that any prolonged disruption could send global prices soaring. In Washington and Brussels, cybersecurity teams revisited their contingency plans, understanding that energy grids are not only targets, they are global choke points. But beyond the economic implications lies something deeper, a growing sense of unease. The blackout shattered the illusion of stability in a world that already feels fragile. It forced nations to confront an uncomfortable truth that power in its modern form is both a strength and a liability. The same technologies that sustain our comfort and progress also make us dangerously exposed. The strike on Moscow's grid was more than a localized act of war. It was a demonstration of how the next conflict could unfold, not through traditional invasions, but through systems that connect us all. As energy traders adjusted their forecasts and global markets held their breath, the symbolic weight of Moscow's blackout grew heavier. It wasn't just about one city losing power, it was about an entire world realizing how quickly its own lights could go out. The message was clear: In an age of interdependence, no one is insulated from instability, and when one node in the global system fails, the entire network flickers. The image of Moscow shrouded in darkness carries a weight far greater than the absence of light. It is the visual embodiment of a fading sense of power, control, and certainty. For decades, the Russian capital has stood as the symbol of strength, resilience, and centralized command. Yet in that moment of blackout, all those symbols dimmed. The streets that once projected authority were reduced to silence, and the glowing skyline that defined Moscow's dominance was replaced by uncertainty. The hook lies in the symbolism itself. When the lights of a capital go out, the lights of confidence across an empire begin to flicker too. What we witnessed was not merely an outage, but a metaphor for the shifting balance of power, a darkness that speaks louder than any political statement. The psychology of power is built on perception. Moscow's blackout shattered that perception in an instant. A city that has long been associated with control found itself vulnerable, its lifeline severed by forces it could neither see nor stop. And that's what makes this moment so profound. Because in geopolitics, image often precedes reality. Once the image of invincibility is cracked, restoring it becomes almost impossible. The blackout revealed that control is not sustained by strength alone, but by the fragile systems that hold a nation together. When those systems fail, even for a night, they expose how thin the line between order and chaos really is. But the symbolism stretches beyond Russia. The darkness over Moscow mirrors the broader uncertainty gripping the world, a reminder that empires, no matter how vast or powerful, are vulnerable to collapse from within. History has shown that great powers rarely fall from a single defeat. They erode slowly, quietly, as their symbols lose meaning. The blackout was one of those moments, subtle but significant, where the story of dominance began to shift toward one of decline. The fear it sparked wasn't just about energy loss, it was about what that loss represents, the erosion of control in an age defined by instability. As the lights eventually flickered back on, the world had already seen too much. The darkness had done its work. It had exposed fragility, shaken certainty, and rewritten the narrative of power. In that fleeting blackout, the illusion of unstoppable strength gave way to a more haunting truth. Even the brightest empires can dim overnight. So as Moscow's lights flicker back on, the world should pay attention. This isn't just about a blackout. It's about the dawning of a new era of warfare and economics, an era where power is measured not only in armies or weapons, but in watts, bandwidth, and control over information. Ukraine's strike, symbolic or strategic, forces us to confront a hard truth. No nation, however powerful, is immune from collapse when its lifelines are targeted. The blackout in Moscow is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new chapter in global instability. And until we rethink the way power, both electrical and political, is distributed in our world, these blackouts, both literal and moral, will continue to define the age we live in.